All right, so I just finished grading the Monsters and Marbles assignment, and I wanted to record an explanation so that way this might help you understand the grade that you received. And we're not really going to have time in class to go over it. So if you want to know, you can listen to this. You can always come ask me, but this might be kind of easier, especially since I won't see you guys for a couple of days. The first thing I want to point out is always go look at the prompt, okay? And remember, the prompt was essentially right here, okay? Based on your reading of the excerpt and article I provided and your analysis of the images, predict what the major motivation for the development of the New World will be and what will be the biggest challenges. So this needs to be tied back to the documents. It's not supposed to be an analysis that includes lecture. Okay, this was specific to the documents. The documents supported what I said in lecture, but I wasn't necessarily needing you to do that. A few people did that, or they alluded or kind of made an inference towards the documents, but they didn't really go into any detail. So if we go back to the documents and kind of look at them, when I say the images, I'm talking about this kind of thing right here. I'm talking about these descriptions and these images. One thing about these particular images here is that you've got, some of these are clearly fantastical. Some of you talked about the images attracting people out of curiosity, and I think I only had one or two people really stretch that into what is accurate, which is it's the Enlightenment, right? So you could make a case that the Enlightenment made people aware of new animals, and so this enhanced curiosity. I'm not sure that without that you're going to truly can buy into this idea of curiosity. Like if I look at these animals, if I were an illiterate European, or even if I was a literate European and I saw pictures of this, I'm not sure I would be enticed solely out of curiosity to go into Europe. So kind of keep those things in mind. Obviously here they've caught a whale, so you see that mankind can do this. I don't think I had anyone make a connection that Europeans, that because of an image like this, I indicated that they would be able to tame the animals of the New World. You've got the alligator. Several people talked about that. I had people present that as either a curiosity or as a reason to be afraid. To me, I think it's more a reason to be afraid based on the image. Some people kind of really camped out with the printing press. The printing press is there. But that's really, if you're talking about how do the images inform, I don't know. I think some people lacked really kind of stretching that out. The printing press is definitely how this information gets out. And so I think that's relevant. And I think that this notion of competition is relevant, but there's not a whole lot of connection into Spanish versus, what do we see as far as Spanish conquest in, say, Peru with the llamas and that kind of thing. That people just don't really quite develop the ideas. You can see here a few people noticed kind of the beauty of the land, this kind of Eden type environment where there's so many resources. A lot of you kind of picked up on the mini ice age that the information mentioned, and that's good. People are going to want to come to the New World. They're going to see these images, and they're going to be thinking a couple of different things. First off, wow, this is really cool, right? Especially if you're talking about these later images. Now, if you're talking about the earlier images, those are pretty scary in a lot of ways. But when you get to the later images, people are going to be enticed by the land and the promise of that. And so in that sense, you have the prosperity. But, I think you have to temper that. You have to be very specific that these are the later pictures, that these are pictures that have progressed beyond some of the earlier, like the Sukkarath and that kind of thing, that were clearly fantastical. So I think that, and when people criticize, well, these animals don't look absolutely perfect, well, no, they're not going to. That was the whole point of talking about the printing press. And I think most people would have had some understanding of that. You clearly, to me, the challenge that's most apparent here is going to be that the animals are scary and they're large and they're very foreign. And surprisingly, I didn't have all that many people grasp that. Now, this one, first off, when I shared it on page 2, not page 1. So to really get to the good pictures of the gallery, you would go here. And what I think people kind of miss the connection that John White, when he's painting these pictures, he's depicting a world that's much kind of friendlier to English settlement. If you look at the PDF, right, these are European depictions from early exploration, primarily from Spanish, but also from a few English and a few French, that kind of thing. But this is early on in the process when people are still not completely comfortable with the New World. What's over there, we don't know. By the time you get to John White, obviously they haven't mapped out everything, but there's a little more awareness of kind of what's going on. And I think John White has a real purpose to present this as being something that's doable and within reach. Some people talked about this being intimidating. Maybe. I don't know. He looks fairly friendly. The tortoise, the crab, these things, even the flamingo, these don't look scary to me, and they look incredibly realistic. This image looks very calm and peaceful. This image, again, these are people dancing and celebrating. So, I'm not sure that John White's images really reflect any kind of fear. In fact, his images would be an enticement. Come on over here. There's land. There's lots of animals. There's lots of opportunity. And look, the natives aren't that bad. And some people really kind of stretch the conflict with the natives, but that comes from lecture, not really from these images, right? Even if you go back to the PDF, when you see natives, they're either working in conjunction with the Europeans, or as with the picture of the alligator, you see them essentially trying to tame the wild beast. So I think that, that there's people missed some aspects right there. And I think that was something that you kind of should have pulled out. The obvious challenge on top of just the vastness of the resources, is going to be the danger to the animals, or from the animals, rather. Some people talked about disease. The danger with disease is to the natives, not so much with the Europeans. So there seemed to be a little bit of confusion, misapplication of things that you had heard in lecture with the images. And again, this was primarily meant to be about the images. What did you see in the images, and what did you read in the initial parts of it? And so I gave you this excerpt because it talked about these notions of biblical themes and limited knowledge, how they wanted food and fur, but yet they see these things in these images, but there's a level of fear and anxiety, and are we sure we want to go there? And so people really struggled to kind of get those nuances about how it was balancing these interests. You have motives like the need for food, the need for social opportunity. Remember, social classes are incredibly rigid during this time period. And I just, I don't think people really kind of grasp that and develop it as completely as they could have. Specifically, I was looking for connections to the images. I wanted to see you take your idea and find an image, find something in there that said, this is what this means. Some of you really struggled with that. You operated very much in kind of this vague, broad sense, and you kind of alluded to things, and that tended to cost you points. If your conclusions were clearly unsupported by the images, and based on, not on my knowledge and interpretation, but based on just visually, like what would I, if I didn't know anything and I looked at that image, what would I see? If what you came up with was completely off, then I took off points for that. If you really failed to extend, you had 300 words. Really that was kind of a soft 300 words. It wasn't like if you went over into 310, I was going to suddenly fail you. Some of you didn't even begin to get close to that. You took, there's a word count to mean, so I can just make this as short and sweet as possible. But remember, the prompt asked you to reflect on the images. This was specific to looking at the documents and analyzing what the documents were telling you. And that there was a lot lacking there. And so, we have there were a few people that did it right and did it well. There were a lot of you that were kind of in the mid-range, around the 8s, maybe the 7, depending on how well you incorporated specific references, depending on how accurate your conclusions were, based on nothing more than a visual interpretation of the images. If you got less than a 7, then you had some serious flaws with what you were doing. And so you really need to kind of go back and reevaluate, how do I read instructions? How do I understand what I'm doing? Reflect on whether you rushed through the assignment. Did you not take it seriously? Something like that. And then make those adjustments otherwise. If you got a 7 or 8, then you're probably, it was probably just your first time out of the gate trying to figure out exactly what I mean. Always read the prompt. Sometimes I ask you to be specific, like with the Monsters and Marvel assignment. I want you to go to the document, connect with the document, be very, very intentional in doing that. Other times, like with the Conquest discussion board, what I'm asking you to do is to synthesize information. And I've given you a bunch of data, a bunch of information that you're supposed to take and then create kind of what you think about it. So these are really two different ways to think critically. And I'm asking you right out of the gate to give me one sample based on strict document analysis and one sample based on kind of a holistic synthesis of what we've been talking about. So there's two approaches to this. And so you need to read the prompt to be sure you understand it. And if you're not sure, you need to ask. If you got a 9, you're in good shape. That means I took off points because there just was something not quite like brought home with what you were saying. Your conclusions were good. You had some reference to the documents, but I felt like you could have done more. It could have been a little better. So if you're at a 9, you're doing solid, you're great. If you're at a 7 or 8, just kind of be sure that you're reading the prompt and understanding what you need to do, and that you're giving yourself time to do it, because that sometimes is a real issue. People rush through it. And when you rush and you don't take time to reflect, what did I just write? You're going to have gaps that when you're thinking and you're typing and you're rushing, you think you're answering, you think you're including that, but you're not. And I can only evaluate what's directly in front of me, even if you actually understand what you meant. So that's part of that communication, of written communication that you have to get across. So hopefully this kind of helps you understand your grades. Be sure that you're putting this stuff in eCampus. I had a couple people that shared that put it directly in Google Classroom. Remember, we talked about the fact that unless it's History Day or kind of the random off kind of assignment, it should go on eCampus. And if you go to Google Classroom, I said, go to eCampus specifically. You have to follow directions, okay? Technically, based on the technology statement, I don't have to accept anything for which you do not follow directions. So just kind of be aware of that. People need to start getting more familiar with the Google Classroom, how to use it, how to mark things as done, all that kind of stuff. And you need to be sure you're learning how to use your eCampus program. You just have to learn to do that. So be sure that you're kind of practicing those skills and that sort of thing. All right, that's it.